Okay, one thing about me, I taught I stand when I teach, we were talking about this, and I move a lot. I've realized though that I did this morning, and I was telling Sheldon, you know, I put a lot of energy into it, but now that I'm older, I notice it more. And also, did you notice that your voice gets out of shape after a while when you're not teaching? Yeah.
Unless you're a singer, and then you have to do the exercises.
Yeah, you have to do the exercises. So I did notice some things. Anyhow, Sheldon and I go way back. And Sheldon, last week, how many were here for Sheldon's talk last week? Yeah. Okay. So several not. Okay, let me just sort of repeat, and Sheldon, you can add in anyone. Sheldon presented a description of the work of Lain McGilchrist. And Lain McGilchrist is this neuroscientist, psychologist, literary critic, no, not literary critic. Anyhow, he's got an amazing background. And he does videos, so you can watch his videos. The divided brain video is probably the easiest one to see. But he's very good at doing interviews, and I'd encourage you to do it. His books are very long, very well documented. I mean, we're talking about thousands of references. Okay. Anyhow, basic theory is we all have brains, and our brains are divided into two hemispheres. And they are divided there for a reason, because they do different things. They have a different attention to the world. And the word attention to is important. The left hemisphere has a focused attention, very focused. Okay, narrow focus. The right hemisphere is broad and vigilant. And you can think of it in terms of, say, a bird, because animals have divided brains too. The bird has to pick out seeds from a bunch of pebbles. It uses its left hemisphere. But the bird also has to be on the lookout for predators. So they have this broad view, and if something stands out from that view as different, like a predator, it notices it. So what he's claiming is that our brains are also this way. And in humans, it's even more so than in animals. And the middle part of that brain, the corpus callosum, part of its purpose is to suppress the other side. So maybe you've had the experience of you're thinking about something in a broad sense, and you're trying to go ahead and put it together, and you're talking, like Steve was doing at that last meeting we had. Remember, can't quite find the right words, and there's something more than that, okay? You're coming from the right hemisphere, okay? And the words, most of our words are over here, in the left hemisphere. But the problem is, the left hemisphere just doesn't get a lot of stuff. And it doesn't even know it doesn't get it. So, it's people like, spit out an answer, okay? Well, when you're dealing with something, you were dealing with St. Augustine, and you just don't spit out an answer. And you could see Steve struggling in there and his mind going, and it was really, I really appreciated that, because I'd been there, done that, and I'm sure you all have. Well, McGilchrist is claiming that our society is stuck to a large extent in the left hemisphere. And this is a disaster. Okay? So, one of the things the right hemisphere does is it uses metaphors. Okay? And the one metaphor, first day of today's sermon, I saw it on video. Jesus talking with Nicodemus. Right? I get it right? It's just a little harder. I went home and watched it. And do you remember what Jesus says about a person born of the Spirit? To Nicodemus? It's like what?
Like the wind.
Like the wind. Okay? You're not sure where it's coming or where it's going, but you know its presence. Okay? That is right hemisphere. Jesus is one of the most right hemisphere people I know. And a problem I think we have in modern society is we take the word revelation and we act like it's from the left hemisphere. These are the words that were spoken. It's not. Revelation is in the right hemisphere. Okay. Things are being revealed to us all the time. All the time. It's in the present. Okay. The texts that we have are sort of testimonials from people who also were living in a world very different than ours, but nevertheless living in a world. And they are giving testament that there's something there in this world, more than just the little nuts and bolts that we have in the world. So we think of some of the things that Jesus said, and they're really pretty remarkable. And the one I'd like you to think about is one that I got 75 years ago. I'm 85, so 75 years ago, my Aunt Olga, and it's in Matthew, I think, 23, 24, something like that. And first of all, that part of Matthew, Jesus is really criticizing would be a mild word, the scribes and Pharisees. Okay, I think at that particular time. And Sheldon, you've got some. Sheldon has wonderful ways of expressing what Jesus was doing, and that sort of just come out. So if you ever want to throw one out, just do it. You know, our group the other day when we met, we referred to Sheldonese talk. And his wife is Denise, so it really has a good plan for us. But the one that got me was, you blind guides, you strain on a gnat and swallow a camel. Okay? This is the one that grabbed me. And as a 10-year-old, I go, you know, if you're blind, how can you strain out gnats? And who would ever want to have a blind guide? And it's impossible to swallow a camel. Right? So clearly, Jesus is not being literal here. He's being profound. And this would be the right hemisphere. And McGilchrist actually uses in his second book that quote from Jesus. Sheldon, I think it's somewhere in the middle of the second book. Mm-hmm. So he can even remember sort of the pages. These books are long. Yeah. When I say
like
long,
1,100 and something.
That's 1,100 pages. That's
so that's the page where it's on.
Oh, it's the page where it's on. Okay. So on Kindle, it's almost 3,000 pages. Okay. So I have both the Kindle and the print. But you don't have to read the video. Read it. You can look at the videos, and then you may read it. Okay. So the question I want to have you, first I want to just tell you that as a kid, that just sort of disappeared. I don't know what this was. But as I grew older, it became more real. It became more real to me. And I never even bothered looking it up until my late 40s. Because I asked people, you know, when I was in 45, say, anybody remember this? And nobody would say so. So I think, did I just imagine this? So I finally go on upstairs, and there's my old Bible for confirmation. So I look up in the back, in the concordance, that's what they call the index. Okay, so it's the Bible, we call it a concordance. So I start looking up there, and of course I look under N for Nat. And the page flips over to G. And sure enough, there it is. And so then I read it and I said, well, but it says, you blind guides, you strain at a gnat, but swallow a camel. Wait a minute, that's not quite how I remember it. And Sheldon, you told me something about the word and and but.
Yeah, they're functionally equivalent.
Okay. So in ancient Greek.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, you have to realize when you talk to Sheldon, you know, he'll be bringing something up in ancient Greek and you want to find out, you know.
So that's a bit of wordplay in the original.
In a sense, yeah. Greek has a way of allowing multiple readings by design, which they thought was a feature, not a bug.
Okay, so now this is fascinating. Okay, one of the things that I really love, and this is hanging around with people who know more about the things than I do, and Sheldon's one, Steve's one. And so when Steve was talking about St. Augustine, this is cool, okay, because I knew he was important. Okay, now, so why would that be important to me? You blind guides, you strain at a gnat, swallow a camel. Now, what I want to do when I stand up here, I want to tell you a little bit how I talk. Because what I want to do is I want to see us get us, not talk about the divided brain in the right hemisphere, but to actually do something. Practice it. I taught broad range of courses. But one of the courses I taught, or this group of courses, were engineering mechanics, statics and fluid dynamics. Now, the reason why I taught those is not because I understood statics and dynamics. The reason I taught that was because I started studying human systems. I said, well, why would that lead you to teach? Because I found that these human systems selectively distort information. And the good news is, my model that I developed was correct. The bad news is exactly the same, because I didn't get funded for that kind of research. And when you don't get funded, they give you large undergraduate classes to teach. Okay, so that's how I ended up teaching mechanics. But actually, it was a blessing in disguise. And what I found is that I would start problems standing over here in the classroom. That means your head turns to the left, right? Particularly if they're lined up. And it turns out that engages your right hemisphere. That's where you take a broad, intuitive, vigilant look. Okay? Then as I worked the problems, we'd set up the equations and stuff, I would move this way. That includes the left hemisphere of the brain. Okay? So I was doing it intuitively, just by watching the students. I never used notes. Okay? Never used notes. And I could do it this way. And then Linda Galbraith belongs to the church. Okay? She said, well, you know, you're engaging the different hemispheres of your brain. Oh, that makes sense. So I asked the students, well, have you had this in school? And about a third of them raised their hand, yes. Well, okay, so when I'm over here, this is the right hemisphere, this is broad and vigilant. That's how we start the problems. We make sketches. So in engineering mechanics, almost everything I did was sort of over in this region. We made sketches. By the time we got to set up the equations and crunch the numbers, that was what the students called plug and chug. Okay, plug and turn a crank. And I found that if the students didn't get it from here, making the sketches, they weren't able to solve the problems. So almost all of it happened here. And then sometimes when we got stuck on a problem, I'd be right here, and I'd say, which way should we go? That's like, how should we think about this? You get that? Okay. Okay, so you blind guides, you strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Why do you think that would grow in importance to me? I mean, I would remember that. It became more real to me, even as the events, particular events that led to me think that way, even those slipped my mind as a metaphor. Okay? The metaphor itself, or the three packed together, made sense. Why? Why do you think? Why do you think that would happen to me? I was a university professor.
Well, you're coming at what is a system you've used forever and realizing there's something else that's available.
That's part of it. It sort of happened to me. Yeah? And I have to thank my Aunt Olga for that. But, you know, I found that I had something. And today's sermon, actually, in gospel lesson, actually covered it. And so I remembered that from a kid. Are there some Bible verses you remember as a kid? Not because you memorized them, but because they were real. Jesus, okay, Nicodemus goes to Jesus, right? Gospel of John. I think you can tell because the Gospel of John is sort of long and tangled. Sometimes it's hard to find Jesus in it. But Jesus, Nicodemus comes and they talk about being born again. And what does Jesus tell him about being born of the Spirit?
There's not the same system to hang your hat on.
Yeah, and what metaphors does he use, or how does he
The wind.
Wind. Okay, you're born of the Spirit. It's like the wind. You don't know where it's coming and where it's going, but you know its presence. Does that make sense? I think that, Steve, when you were struggling to find the words, that would fit. You were searching around. Something was there. Where it's coming, I don't know. Where it's going, I don't know. I can't get the name.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's knowledge, where it came from, where it's going, but feeling the wind on your face is experiential.
That's correct. You're absolutely right. Good point. It's experiential, and when that became meaningful to me is because I'd be laying in the grass out there listening to the wind, and that thing would come up. And if you want to know the meaning of that, the best place to start is go on out and listen to the wind. And then metaphorically, you can shift. Okay, now, the right hemisphere actually does have the experience. McGilchrist says that's where our involvements in the world, that's where we come to know it in the biblical sense. Okay? Sheldon, you want to say something about knowing in the biblical sense? He's good at this.
The interesting thing about how that phrase is used in the Bible is that, of course, when they say someone knows someone else in the biblical sense, they're talking about a sexual joining. The interesting thing, though, is that when you are talking about the very first time for those two people, you don't see the word to know. It's only on subsequent occasions that you see the word to know. And that makes sense because you can't really know someone until after the moment of intimacy. You know, Jacob certainly didn't know Leah, you know. Oh, I thought that was Rachel, you know.
A lot of arranged marriages.
Yeah, but then afterwards, when they talk about his children that he has by Leah, they use the word to know. And when Judah encounters Tamar, his daughter-in-law, dressed up like a prostitute by the side of the road, and she entices him, they don't use the word to know, but then later on, after he finds out who she really was, and he did not know her afterwards. So, you know, there's this understanding that you can't know something until after you've had that intimate experience.
So metaphorically then, when we say know in the biblical sense, We're meaning it in a broad involvement with, and which is very different than getting the definitions of. Okay? That would be left hemisphere.
Yeah.
Now, McGilchrist says the world presents itself to us through the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere represents it. Okay? And what happens is the represents it is a representation of it. Okay? And so theories, data, and a lot of what goes on in academia is left hemisphere. Or it's right hemisphere constrained by the department, your discipline, your paradigms, whatever the words are. It's constrained, and then it's directed towards getting something more specific, narrowly focused. So I had a group that met for 12 years, same exercise, and we called it the Swallowed Camel Club. And it was based on Jesus' warning about university professors. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. So this is how I, in a sense, really, why it gained meaning to me, is it grew from the experiences, largely frustrating experiences, of the problems in the world that we're facing, like environmental problems, don't fit into nice little categories that professors have. We need a broader perspective. We need a broader, vigilant perspective. And that is a perspective where we need metaphors. We need to struggle like Steve was struggling with St. Augustine. And the world of the right hemisphere ends up with paradox. And of course, yes, no trouble with paradox. Left hemisphere can't handle it. It wants to know, this is it, this is it, this is it.
Technology, facts, have to have proof. But I wonder, will there be metaphors in AI?
Yes.
It's all going to be so broken up and analyzed and regurgitated and whatever.
Well, they will regurgitate. That's a term the students used to use too in passing tests. They would say, I cram and flush. Okay, and regurgitate, and they would use these terms. I'd get the confidence of the students, so when I asked them a question, they could tell I really wanted an answer. I didn't want them to regurgitate or anticipate what I wanted. And they would end up being bluntly honest in the language they use. Like, I regurgitated it on a test. I remember one student, he had just came out of an exam, final exam, and he sees me and he starts walking like this. He says, boy, we all dumped it all out in that room, and if the people next taking the course could shovel it up, they could save themselves a lot of time. So, so they would do things like this. These are metaphorical expressions, but they're honest. And the interesting thing is, they're confessional. In other words, they're saying, let me tell you, I may have gotten an A in this course, but I really don't understand it. Let me tell you how I got the A. It's called plug and chug, cram and flush. You stuff your mind with what, the authority figures are going to grade you on, and then you dump it out at the appropriate time and place. It's not what you know that counts, it's when you know. Okay, so, first of all, are there some things that you want to share on this? Some experiences that you'd like to share?
Well, one experience when I was living in Martinique. In Martinique, there was really two languages. French is colonialist language. That's the European language. But the slaves and the former slaves developed their own language to talk with each other. That language developed after the abolition of slavery when the former slaves did not want to work any of the sugar plantations anymore and retired to plots of ground in the highland areas where cane growing wasn't commercially feasible. And so in a way, ensuring a certain isolation from the colonial society in French, their language was, which is a full language, is Creole. In this case, it's spelled with an I, Creole. I found neither with French nor with Creole, which I had to learn because it's largely unwritten, although there's been attempts to write it since. It's never really caught on. I was more fluent, but frankly, in neither language could I lie. I couldn't, I had to say what seemed to be absolutely true, because if I lied, I had to remember what I said. And all my cognitive activity was taken up just forming the proper and appropriate phrase in the language I was speaking. So there is a real question about our brains and how they work.
Yeah.
And that's used to gain, well, from McGilchrist, it was injuries to one side or another, right, and what associated behavior. But in experimental neurology or neurological psychology, it's the reaction time to various perceptions. And that's where the whole business about the background comes in, because if you background some information on some level, it is seen and retained, and that can be accessed by then timing when the background material is shown that the processing time is less. It's already been acquired as a part of a sequence of information. So by reaction time, you can actually begin to, along with the studies of brain injuries and the effect on behavior, you begin to understand which parts of language are being, or which parts of experience are actually occurring in the brain. This is especially helpful because if you use what's called an fMRI, where you're looking at blood flow to different parts of the brain, it's slow and it happens in many microseconds after the event. And it's hard to make a clear relationship between what was going on and the appearance of the brain. So you get a very gross picture, but to get the finer picture, you experiment and you look at reaction time too.
So how does that reaction time work out in terms of the left and right hemispheres?
Well, that's the question I'm asking myself.
Okay.
But my guess is that the piecemeal knowledge of the left, which is as sure as Johnson answering, Berkeley's solipsism. He says, I know whether there's a rock or not, he kicks it.
Yeah.
Right? That is, the left brain presents you with experience that, as far as you, the receiver, is concerned, is absolutely sure. It's absolutely trustworthy. Meanwhile, the right brain needs to be evaluated because the mirage looks absolutely trustworthy when you first see it. And besides, you're thirsty. The right brain says, no, let's bring in experience. And here's where you're saying, well, it wasn't to your 40s. I think they should get older. You begin to bring, have the ability to bring more of your experience into the judgment of what the left brain is doing.
Okay. Okay.
So that's...
Okay, so now I want to throw out one thing here. First of all, I did this class before, before the service. And it's totally different than what we're having here, which didn't surprise me because of but I want to ask a question on this. I hadn't intended on this. By the way, when I taught engineering mechanics, I did not use notes. Okay, I would read the body language and I would go from there. And the best classes were ones that went in directions that I had not playing the ball. Okay, and that's engineering mechanics. And you might say, well, that's a lousy way to teach. Actually, no, because when we had the computer-graded exam that all of the different sections taught by different professors, the students had to take it. My students would consistently score 1 letter grade higher. So the you know, responding and so forth really makes a difference. Yes, do you have?
Well, I was going to say, you're not precluding in a very scientific area, these mechanics, that there has to be a agreed on foundational part of information?
Well,
And then you play with it, and then they got higher scores.
well, what we did is I actually played with it before. And when I say play with it, I mean, you're asking good questions. We never sat down and said, here's Newton's laws. Now we're going to logically apply them. And I think if you asked, there were some engineers here, they'd say, why would you want to do that? So, but what I would do is I sort of lead them in some, what I would sort of call common sense kind of dialogue, where I would lead them. I would lead them because...
You had some structure that they needed in order to...
Well, yeah, I mean, it was not arbitrary, but the big problem, they were waiting for the structure. So the big problem is I wanted them to open it up. So I'll tell you one class what I did, and then you can sort of get an idea. So I'm in the class, and when the students, this is statics. Now this is the first real engineering course they've had, and they're sophomores, first year sophomores. You know, the kids are sort of scared of this course and so forth.
Scared to death.
Yeah, okay, we got it, it's okay. So when they walk in the room, I'm playing Vivaldi on a tape recorder. And I'll sit down, you know, the clock says 9 o'clock or whatever the time to start. So I start lecturing on Vivaldi. Okay, now I looked it up in the dictionary, no, in an encyclopedia. You couldn't look up online then, you looked in the encyclopedia. So I start lecturing on Vivaldi, who he was and what the music. Okay, now what do you think's going on in the student's mind?
What the hell's going on here?
That's correct.
I can't use any of this yet.
No, they're actually thinking more about themselves. They're worried.
Am I in the wrong class?
That's right. They're thinking, am I in the wrong class? And they're nervous. They're nervous. Am I in the wrong class?
Who is this guy?
Yeah, no, they're thinking, am I in the wrong class? I mean, it's more their own fear, you know? So I stopped and I said, man, you're not taking notes. Nobody says anything. So I continue on Vivaldi. I just look at them and I stop again. Well, something wrong? And one nervous kid finally says, is this statics? And I go, statics? No. How many think this class is statics? Well, only a third of them raise their hands. So then I point to one of them that didn't raise their hand. I says, what do you think the course is? And they say, statics. Well, why didn't you raise your hand? Okay, let's go through hand-raising exercises. Okay, so we practice the right hand, but we practice the left hand, you know. Now both hands, you know. Okay, now, how many think it's statics? All hands go up. And I go, oh, let me see this book. And I go, look at the book. And I go, this looks boring. Wouldn't you rather have Vivaldi and Bach? And they say, well, yes, I would, but I really need to have statics because I need it for the next course.
Yeah.
So I said, well, what's statics? So they start saying, well, that's when something isn't moving. I said, well, the Earth is moving. We're going around the orbit, so that means we don't, well, no, that's not what we mean. We mean, so I said, you mean when something is changing its motion? yeah, so it's not accelerating, right? That's different, right, than moving. So you see, I'm introducing the course, but largely through them. And I said, well, why would something accelerate change? Well, because you put a force on it, okay? Now, already I'm getting them away from the Aristotelian, way of thinking.
So are you guiding a system then of
Yeah,
building
I'm
blocks
guiding
of
them,
what
but-
they need to do to be fluid in their own thinking?
Yeah, but I'm also guiding them in a way so that we end up with some common sense rather than me telling them laws about what's going on in the world. So I am guiding them. I'm not saying, the natural position is to stay at a body of rest, which is, I think, Sheldon, who started that one? Aristotle.
Oh, Newton.
No, Newton had you push it and then it changes.
Right.
But
Is it body at rest where rain?
Well, what the natural position is for the system to go to a body of rest.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So that would have been Aristotle.
That's Aristotle.
And Newton comes along and is different. But so I have to go ahead and not give them, in a sense, a set of laws, left hemisphere to do, but a way of looking at the world that sort of makes sense for them.
So that's your goal,
That's what I'm doing now, yeah.
with
But
information that's related to what they thought they signed up for.
Well, yeah, it is, although I wouldn't have phrased it as my goal. It's just sort of happening between us. Obviously, I'm here to teach statics.
I was going to say you're the expert in the room.
Well, I wouldn't have said that, okay? But
Well, if you
obviously,
went to
if I'm going to
Berkeley,
be the teacher,
The
I
guy
have to
down
know
there
more
was
than
the
they
expert in the
do.
room.
I have to know more than they do, okay? So, but expert, I'm.
Well, somebody has to know something. I mean, you have to start someplace.
So that's what I'm doing, that's what I'm
Okay.
doing. But the reason I was hesitant to use the word expert, these are good discussions, is because my experience is they've been the blind guides that strain out gnats and they swallow the camel, they miss the big picture. So I want to have them keep open and try to actually start this using some, looking around the world with some common sense. Now, that means some of the common sense is wrong. Okay, the right hemisphere is wrong sometimes. It's okay with that. It doesn't worry about that. The left hemisphere does. Okay, left hemisphere is stubborn, doesn't want to change. So okay, so we have this discussion that's sort of going around, and we end up with this understanding. So then
Okay, so that this understanding, quotes, is what you're aiming for.
yeah, but I'm aiming for bigger than that, because remember what?
This is your starting point, correct?
Well,
You can't do it all in an hour.
I can't do it all in an hour, but I got 10 weeks.
Okay,
I got 10 weeks there.
which is limited.
And so I hesitate to use starting point because the word point is too focused. Okay, so what I would say is I'm trying to start the dialogue. I'm starting the dialogue that's going to go somewhere. It's going to go somewhere. And I will learn something, and they will too. Okay, now obviously I have to know how to work the problems better than they do. Okay.
And I'm going to say you have to know your engineering.
Well, see, statics,
Otherwise, somebody's
mechanics,
wasting their money for being in this
well,
class.
they didn't waste their money. But the thing is, that was not my field.
Yeah.
It was not my field. I was studying human systems, and I got to do this other thing. So I had statics in 1958, I think. Okay, so this was sort of, I had it and passed it, and actually once you start thinking about it, it works. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to get both their hemispheres going on this. So if you're right, I have to end up where they can actually get an answer to a problem. That's the left hemisphere. That's right. But they're really not going to get there in a good sense unless they learn how to intuitively start somewhere. Okay? Well, these are good questions.
So you're giving them a whole system of approaching whatever discipline they're going to be, quotes, taught.
They don't know what discipline they're going into. And
But you're providing some kind
I'm
of
teaching them a problem-solving course,
yeah,
which
scaffolding.
is mechanics. And they'll work problems of things that are all around us. And at the end of the course, they'll see the world in a different way. But I don't want them to give up on that right hemisphere when they do it. Because what happens too often, they'll say to me something like, well, what equation should I use? And my response is, I don't know, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you. That's my response, okay? So let me just finish what I did in the course. First, this is still back to the first day. So then I'm getting them, so then we're saying that in order to accelerate an object, okay, we have to apply a force to it, okay? Yeah. So this is statics. That means that it's not accelerated, right? That means for any object, the sum of the forces have to add up to 0. Does it make sense to you? Or else it will be accelerated in whatever direction. Yeah? Okay. Now, so then I say to them, okay, I'll make a deal with you. I'll teach the statics to you, but can I still play some Vivaldi and Bach? And they said, yeah, we'd like that. Okay? So then, in statics, you can also have a rotational acceleration. And in a static system, it's not rotating. So a bridge, you don't want it to rotate. You don't want it to accelerate. You want it to be static, because acceleration means it falls down. Okay, you get the idea? So it's common sense. So I have, in the past, what I could do is I would go to the students, and they had worked with tools, wrenches. So you got a bolt here, and you got a wrench, and you're trying to, and it won't work. Get a longer wrench. And they'd say, yeah, get a longer wrench. Well, these kids haven't worked with tools. So you see, I have to start changing the experience. I have to go ahead and say, well, what experiences do they have? And I'm looking around, and I see the door. And there's the handle on the door. I said, wow, look at that handle on the door. Why don't they put the handle over by where the hinges are? And they all laugh. Okay? That's because intuitively they know that there's some reason why it's over there, because that you can get more leverage, and they start talking their language. Okay, so what I've gotten to do is get them to talk about the word moment or torque is what it is. And I've got them to talk about that. So then you have to go ahead and start working problems. Now I remember as a student, the professor would have all the problems worked out. Okay? And I'd follow the steps. And I said, okay, I can follow the steps, but how did he know to do those steps? I couldn't figure that out. And I can tell you how he knew. He got it wrong, and he had to go back. Okay? But then they don't tell you that when they come and work it out on the board. The professors can say, you know how many times I had failed on this, screwed up, and had to go back and start over? They don't tell them that. It's like everything is out. One guy had it on the blackboard, the whole problem solving out. And he used to tap the blackboard each step, and we'd almost go to sleep. So what I would do is I would pick problems that I hadn't solved. I had no solution out there. So we would solve the problem, the class and I. And I would always get up and I would start over here, engage the right hemisphere of their brain. And we'd make a sketch. It's called a free body diagram. Okay? We'd make a sketch. It's common sense. Oh, we'll try this sketch. And then you look at the sketch and it's got all forces acting on the object. This, of course, is statics. Therefore, in any direction, all those forces have to add up to 0. Okay, makes sense? But if you leave one out, you'll make a mistake. So you better get the sketch right. So then what they do is they look at the sketch, and then they start writing down these symbols, called mathematical setup, equation setup, which basically says all these forces in any direction have to add up to 0. Then they start putting in the numbers. Turn the crank and get the answer. Put a box around it. Okay? Now, when I worked it, I would get stuck. What do we do now? And a lot of times we had to go back and make a different sketch. So I was acting out how you actually solve problems. And in doing that, I was acting out the right hemispheres, because the right hemisphere, it doesn't worry about going back and starting over again. The left hemisphere, look, this is what we have to do. Okay? The right hemisphere says, we better work on this. You know, look at this thing again. What's going on? Okay, you get the idea? So I'm trying to keep them to use both hemispheres in the brain. There's a problem. Okay, so you got that. That's what I taught. Okay. But there is a problem here. Because what happens is, in a status course, when they write the answer down here, put the box around it, that's the end. Right? That's the end. And McGilchrist is saying, we have to go, after we've done this, we have to go back, return to the right hemisphere. Okay? So I don't want to have them simply end up here, where they think that once the left hemisphere is done, that's the end of it. See? No, you've got to go back. And so I would do things in this class, like I'd stop and I'd say, okay, footnote in this class, I just showed them how, I don't have time to explain it, I showed them how you could really do something cool by assuming 2 different ways. You don't know which way is correct. You know one of them's wrong. You assume it, you solve it, then look at the answer and pick which one is the right. So, I mean, it's sort of, you know, they thought it was clever and stuff. But I would add these footnotes and I'd say, you know what I just showed you? There's a lot of problems in the world that won't work that way. It won't work that way. Now, it's not going to be on the test. They'd all lean forward to listen. They'd all lean forward. And I'd tell them some story about complex systems or, you know, a whole bunch of other things. And say, you gather a group of people together in the room. Yes, you can apply statics. It won't tell you anything about what they're talking about. Okay.
So when you constructed a test, what did you want to find out?
Okay, good thing. So I said, let me tell you about constructing a test. You raised it. Let's pursue it. Okay? When I am constructing a test for these students, I'm worried about something. What do you think I'm worried about as a teacher?
That they'll be able to answer it.
Yeah. I'm worried that my brightest students won't be able to answer it because you can't answer that question. So what I have to do is I have to reframe the problem so that they can answer it. And they are not told that. They're taught to accept the problem as it's framed. That's what happens on a test. Okay? It's accepted as a frame. It's framed. You don't say, well, I think I'll change this question and answer a different one. You're not allowed to do that on a test. So the students are being taught to accept the problem as it's framed. I'm telling them, wait a minute. There's a problem in framing the problem. And I'm worried that I'm going to give you a problem, frame the problem in a way that can't be solved. And then you're all going to be angry at me, and I'm not going to be able to give you a grade. So then, you know, I get lousy evaluations, you get, and the students are all nodding their heads.
Nobody's happy.
Yeah, yeah. So then I say, what I have to do is I have to reframe it so you can solve it. That means when you take that test, the answer's already there. I'm just trying to find out if you can get it. I says, guess what? It also means that if there's problems that we're working on in society that we're unable to solve, like climate change, okay, maybe we need to reframe the questions, okay? And that's exactly what I tell them when I'm writing stuff now, and I've told them it's been framed in the wrong way, okay? One of the things that's been framed is, and you can act as history of this, and I can give a whole other session on this. They call it science first, top down. The scientists do the work, give it to the decision makers, policy makers, and they make the policy. Who are these policy makers? It's crazy. And they're confusing science. What does science do? Science comes up with conclusions, right? That's what it does. And a conclusion, while it's not absolute truth, it's as close as they can get to it, right? 95% or something like that. We're not dealing with conclusions. We're dealing with decisions. And when you make a decision in a world that's uncertain, it's uncertain. That's life. That's life. The right hemisphere is comfortable with that. The left hemisphere isn't. It wants a definite answer. Well, the world is uncertain, so how do we go ahead and make decisions? You say, well, I'm not going to make a decision. And I said, that's a decision. Conclusions you can put off. A decision to do nothing is a decision. You've made that decision. So you can't avoid decisions. Yes, you do put off conclusions, but you don't put off decisions because they're going to happen. If you do nothing, that's a decision. He says, but I didn't acknowledge it as a decision. Tough. That's okay. That's your problem. You decided not to acknowledge it. Okay? That's how I'm going to frame it. No decision is a decision. You see? So then that gets to the case of, well, gee, the world's uncertain. What do we do? So what industry did, and you have the documents, they use uncertainty to delay any kind of decisions. Well, why? I mean, that doesn't make sense. So I would go ahead and I would write up this, and the way that the climate change and other global problems was framed, the way it was framed, was science will make predictions. Okay, that's the short version. And then policymakers will look and get the answers. Well, in a world that's complex and changing, will you ever can you really make predictions? So I wrote a paper in 1972, with a guy named Scott Overton. We could spend some time on this, but I'll just mention it to you. Which he basically said, we cannot have a strategy based on predictions because the world's changing faster than our ability to understand it, to foresee the consequences. And the danger is, while we're waiting for conclusions.
Better data.
Yeah, more research is needed. That's the most common conclusion of all environmental research. Okay, more research is needed. Meanwhile, you know, what's happening is it's building up.
The problems are getting bigger.
The problems are getting bigger. Now, how do I explain that to people? Okay, now I'm going real fast because the clock is going down. Okay, what I want to do is I want to use the right hemisphere. I'm writing this stuff now on the right hemisphere. I don't want to go out and have the scientists come in and explain them. First of all, in interdisciplinary, the people in one discipline, they don't understand the stuff in the other disciplines. I mean, they may understand some of it, but it's embarrassing sometimes how little they really understand. Like even like mathematics, they say there's different dialects of mathematics. And there's one dialect can say certain things and not others, I could go into this, but let me tell you how I want to explain it using the right hemisphere. Okay? Okay? And just now I want to write this up, and this is the kind of stuff we should be teaching everybody. Okay? In the past, what we did is we had problems like water pollution, right? Now, Craig Massey was here, he's designed sewage treatment plants. I've done that too, not like he has. We have a sewage treatment plant here in Corvallis. It's called activated sludge. And what it does is the rivers got better. So metaphorically, that's like the thermostat. The pollution level was too high, so metaphorically, we dialed down the emissions by building a sewage treatment plant, and the river got better. You got it? That's the metaphor. And our institutions now, our organizations, through the history of that success, rivers have gotten better, has that metaphor built into it, structure. So what I want to do is give them a new metaphor. Okay? And here's the metaphor. I'm not going to have to dial down. Instead, I'm going to have you think about this table and what my emissions are, carbon dioxide, for example, or PFAS chemicals would be another one. That's the one they're talking about for the dump, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and it should be the title of a new mystery series, Coffin Butte. Okay, these are chemicals that are called forever chemicals. Let's just use, instead of climate change, because that's a little complex. Let's just take PFAS chemicals, forever chemicals. That's what they call them. Okay? So what we do is we take our emissions, metaphorically, it's like putting a brick on the table, bricks on the table. Okay? So what happens to the bricks? They pile up on the table. Okay? Now, if I want to dial down the emissions, that means I put fewer bricks on the table every day. Okay? The pile's still growing.
But not as fast.
But not as fast. Correct. And even though I can't make predictions of what's going to happen, I can say, if I keep going this way, something will happen and it'll be bad. Will happen to the table. Collapse. It'll collapse. Okay, so you get the picture. Now, that's not a scientific prediction, because I'm not saying at time t, here's what we're doing, and here's at time t, what's going to happen. I'm going to say, it's more a prophetic warning. If you keep behaving like this, something bad is really going to happen. Okay? So the idea of using uncertainty to justify keeping emissions going, it doesn't make sense from that other metaphor. Now, I want to just, okay, I want to explain what metaphors do roughly. They're different than models, like computer models. When scientists try to make a model, a better model, they try to make it more realistic. And so what they do is they add more stuff, right? So huge models, no one understands the whole thing, okay? But let's suppose that instead the choir is, an orchestra, full orchestra, is practicing a piece of music. And Sheldon comes along and says, wait a minute, they're practicing the wrong music. Okay? The wrong piece. So he says, well, what music should we do? And I can't remember the name. Sheldon's can't. So what he does is he hums the tune. Just hums it. Maybe a little out of tune, hums the melody, maybe just a portion of it, and then the rest of us go, oh yes, I remember that. I went to this concert right up here. I went to this. It helps us recall the reality. Now, what the model builders would say is, the ones that are building the models, they would say to Sheldon, wait a minute, you left out the kettle drums. You didn't get the violins. And so here, poor Sheldon, I'm trying to do all this stuff, and we don't have a clue what he's doing. You get it? So what the metaphors do is they're reminding us stuff, getting us to pay attention to something that has gone on and experienced. That's what the right hemisphere does. See? The left hemisphere is telling you what it is. So if the left hemisphere leaves out something important like the kettle drums, okay, oh, that's bad, you better include that. The right hemisphere, you can't possibly do all this. Why would you even want to? You come and know that, oh yeah, I remember that. And the remembrance of the experience is far more complex than the left hemisphere model ever could construct. Okay? Okay, so you begin to get it. So what I'm trying to do on here is, I think McGilchrist is really onto something really important. And I do think that really in terms of our faith traditions, they have a lot more to offer us in this world than we're doing. I think we ourselves, being part of this society, are too hooked into the left hemisphere. Okay? And so, you know, somebody changes a word but if you try to change a word in, say, the Nicene Creed, okay, people would probably get upset. And yet, we know that, like it says, we believe, isn't that how it starts? We believe? Okay. In our society, believe is usually referred to as a series of propositions that you accept. But in English, if you go back far enough, the word believe comes from the word leave. And what did the word leave mean in early?
Love.
Love. It meant love. So the word believe really comes closer to the word beloved. And so what the Apostles' Creed is, what do you give your heart to? And they're explaining, they're describing something you give your heart to. It's not like a test that you would take in school where you have so many multiple choice questions you have to check off, so many boxes you have to check off, you know, and if you're a Baptist, you have to check off all of them, the Episcopalian, maybe only half of them. You know, it's not that at all, okay? So what I'm getting at is I think that McGilchrist has given us a tremendous opportunity to draw upon and be more prophetic in a world. Because if our world is dominated by the left hemisphere, okay, definitions and rules, and the right hemisphere has a capacity for a prophetic tradition to be acted out. And that's what Jesus did. And I remember when Jesus would teach, they would say things like, and they were amazed at how he spoke with authority, unlike the scribes. What does that mean? What is an authority unlike the scribes? The scribes are doing left hemisphere stuff. They're writing stuff down. So how did Jesus speak with authority unlike the scribes? I don't know. He drew upon the right hemisphere, and he used metaphors and parables. And I think he even says, didn't he say someplace, we're only going to speak in parables. Or the prophets only speak in parables, something like that. Okay? So he does that. And they said he spoke with authority. Right? Okay. So you can see I get a little excited about that.
That was really interesting.
So
I was just thinking like crazy as you were talking.
well, that's
Very helpful.
And I was thinking that way.
Interesting.
Steve, let me just tell you quickly, just the remembrance when you were talking, and you were talking about St. Augustine. And I made the comment that Hannah Arendt, in her dissertation, drew upon St. Augustine. And Hannah Arendt was a Jew in Nazi Germany. He knew about Hannah Arendt, knew how she drew that. And then I made the comment that her advisor, I think, one of her advisors, is Martin Heidegger, okay, who for a time belonged to the Nazi Party. And then, the world has paradoxes. Then I say, yeah, and they say that, she and Heidegger had an affair. And what did you tell me?
I said, I read the love letters he wrote to her.
I had read the love letter. It was a real affair.
It was a real affair, and I found it almost impossible to read because I was so disgusted by his condescension.
Okay. So then, the rest of the story, which they haven't told you, is I go to a conference. I meet Herbert Dreyfus. You read Herbert Dreyfus? No? Oh! Well, I thought maybe you could. Herbert Dreyfus is, if you look him up in Wikipedia, he's a philosopher from Berkeley. And he got hold of some of my stuff, through Sally Hacker. Okay? This is weird. And so he invites me to a workshop where the philosophers, two branches of philosophy, analytical and existential or continental, are going to, try to talk to each other. Okay? So I get invited. And there's about 20 people. We actually stay at Bert Dreyfus' house. Cammy and I went down there. So I get invited there. And there's Richard Rorty, John Searle, Charles Taylor. The living big name philosophers in me. I didn't know. And I've worked construction. I didn't work in philosophers. And in construction, people would get in an argument, and they might call somebody an SOB. Okay? Well, they don't mean it literally. They're not saying your mother's a dog. They're just posturing. These philosophers fought dirty. The analytical philosophers would accuse the existentialist philosophers of being Nazis. Because Heidegger was an existential and he had been a Nazi. And when a philosopher does something, it's different than somebody on a construction crew. Because the philosopher not only sounds like they really believe it, but they make a convincing case. And if you did that on a construction crew, you'd get dumped in a ditch. You'd be lucky they didn't backfill it. Okay, that's enough for now. And
Thank you.
I'd like sometime, if we ever had more discussions, like just discussions, and I've talked too much to it. Because one of the serious problems, and maybe you can relate to this, of doing that right hemisphere, is sort of loneliness. It's hard to really talk with people because the left hemisphere has taken over so much. So if we can ever get together and just have some more discussions every now and then, I'd like to relate to you some of the stuff that I'm trying to do on, say, environmental problems and using the right hemisphere. And at the same time, hearing things like Steve or some of you think of and your teaching experience. I knew when you were asking those questions, you were asking good ones from a teacher's perspective. I knew that. I had to go fast. So anyhow, and of course, Sheldon and I, we've had some fantastic discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.